June 3rd, 2023. Well, with everything been going on in the debt limit issue, I haven't really got back to the war in Ukraine much lately, but I intend to focus on this video on that primarily. Although I will make a few comments about the outcome of the debt limit at the end of this, if anybody sticks around that long. But lots been happening in Ukraine and since the fall of Bakhmut. Um, it looks like that, first of all, the situation on that front is pretty well stabilized. Once the Ukrainians have been driven out of there, effectively it looks like the Wagner group is pulling out and for a little R&R after months of combat, and other Russian units are going in to take their place. And it seems like that the front's pretty well stabilized. And all along the line, there are a lot of developments, and we'll get into it a little bit. One thing is that I guess the high point, of course, recently, of course, have been the drone attacks on Moscow, which have occurred. And by the way, I will point out that one of my previous videos, I thought that the first drone attack on the Kremlin was probably a false flag. I'm now rescinding that viewpoint. I was wrong about that. I think it really was Ukrainian. But it looked pretty pathetic, a single drone, but whatever. But I think it looks like that they really do have some kind of drone that has that sort of range that they're using to go in there and do that sort of thing. But the big issues are on other fronts. For instance, there's been a pretty big set of missile strikes toward Kyiv. And essentially what was going on, I think, primarily was a battle between the newly installed Patriot defense system and the Russian missiles. And I guess look at it this way, that PAC-3 has been able to bring down some of the Russian hypersonic missile and maybe even Iskanders. But on the other hand, it looks like, if the latest report is correct, and we'll see, it looks like maybe the Russians finally succeeded in knocking out that Patriot battery. They're saying basically they did the kill shot, which I presume that means the control radar system, which is the core of the battery. But we'll see in the days ahead if that really is true or that's just Russian propaganda. These people on both sides are not necessarily honest. But if you like these videos, please give me a like, and we're looking for more subscriptions. And of course, you can always forward these to anybody else that might be interested. So it looks like that although the Patriot gave a good fight, it looks like the Russians were able just to kind of eventually wear it down and overwhelm it with waves of drones and waves of missiles and cruise missiles and Iskander ballistic missiles. And eventually, it's one battery. So, and then they went ahead apparently and attacked the Ukrainian intelligence headquarters, sort of like their CIA or whatever building, and apparently did some major damage to it, apparently to the point that they're trying to prevent any pictures of the damage to be shown to the public. Again, waiting to see what the real outcome is on that. But apparently that may have been what triggered that last wave of drone attacks on Moscow in retaliation. So the battle continues. Storm Shadow missile, a British cruise missile, which apparently is a bit on the stealthy side, has been introduced and done some successful strikes. And they're basically being launched from apparently Su-24s that were in the Ukrainian inventory. On the other hand, the Russians apparently managed to identify a base where these Su-24s that had been converted to carry the Storm Shadow were based, and went ahead and knocked out like 5 of them in a missile strike. So, and basically that's the way this thing is going. I mean, on the other hand, the Ukrainians did a drone attack and set an oil refinery on fire. They apparently a missile, perhaps Storm Shadow, from another airplane did successfully hit a naval base on the Black Sea. There was some sort of engagement between robotic speedboats and that Russian ship, and it seems like probably the Russian ship actually did manage to shoot up the 3 speedboats, but may have been damaged by one of them, but not sunk. Unclear on that one. So that's the sort of thing that's going on. Along the actual front, the main thing I think is going on right now, as I said in the previous video, I believe that before any real Ukrainian offensive, there's going to be some feints. And I think the one that's going on right now that sort of falls in that category is these attacks on Belgorod, which is a city near the Ukrainian border up in the, I guess you'd call it the northeast of Ukraine. Um, and this is an area where the Russians had occupied early in the war, and then that was the one where the Ukrainian surprise attack hit against a weakly defended area with maybe a few thousand Russian troops that really weren't primary combatants and were able to be run back into Russia. And Ukraine has since that time occupied that area. Well, now they've brought in a couple of artillery brigades and they're starting to shell Belgorod and also other small towns that are even closer to the Ukrainian border. And they're sending attacks in which are being claimed to be a kind of the Russians dissidents that have formed some kind of joined up as a anti-government force that fights with the Ukrainians, although we're not sure that's the case. It may be that or maybe it's Ukrainian troops, but they're moving across largely in squad and platoon strength groups and launching various attacks. And there's battles between the Russian defenders and these groups, as well as, of course, these ongoing artillery attacks. And I think what's going on here, the Ukrainians are hoping to force the Russians to move reserves away from areas that are near where they plan to launch their offensive, which is probably most people think is going to be in the south, closer to Crimea, either toward Mariupol, going kind of a south easternly direction, or just straight south out of Zaporizhia. So, so if they can force the Russians to move troops and reserves that were being used to basically launch a counteroffensive or even just defend against the future Ukrainian offensive and move them out of position and up here to defend Belgorod, then they've actually weakened the Russian position and got themselves in a better position to attack. So I think that's why they're shelling these civilian areas in there, and we'll just have to again see how that plays out. Right now, it doesn't look like they're really gaining ground much, but there are conflicts and there are casualties. Otherwise, all along the line, it looks like the Russians are continuing their slow offensive just about everywhere, picking off little small pieces of the line and making very small advances day by day. Nothing spectacular, just a little field here or a little piece of a town there, and meanwhile, of course, Ukraine is defending strongly everywhere as well. So, and it does look like, though, that the Russian air offensive is continuing and is largely focused on trying to preempt the future planned Ukrainian offensive by hitting their supply lines and troop concentrations and so forth. So that kind of summarizes the action that's been going on. It's I think that still basically the trend is in favor of the Russians at the moment. It's really unclear what kind of a Ukraine offensive will occur. It does look like if they were to launch one, they could definitely gain some ground initially, but it's unclear whether they can hold it or how much they'd really take. And so we're just waiting to see. It depends a lot on the weather conditions, which I think are starting to dry up now that we're into June and the rainy season should end. And at that point, the ground gets good and hard where heavy armored vehicles can maneuver. And we'll just have to see how it plays out. But that's kind of my assessment about the situation in the war in Ukraine. As I said earlier, I want to discuss a little bit about the outcome of the debt limit debate. I thought it was kind of interesting that basically, when it really came down to it, the Republicans decided to get very opposed. I mean, for instance, the Democrats ended up voting more for the final outcome than the Republicans did in the House. And then the Senate, it went way over that way, which with only the, your normal moderates that tend to vote for bipartisan bills on the Republican side voting for it. And almost all the Democrats, except for the extreme ultra liberals, the Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren types, voting against it. So, in other words, it's sort of I always see this as how the Republicans, even when they win, they don't win big enough to make themselves happy, and then they kind of go into this whiny mode. In my opinion, this was basically a success. I mean, Biden went into this thing for a lengthy period of time absolutely refusing to negotiate, and Republicans put forward a position, like I said in the previous video, that was a pretty strong negotiating position, but it was never expected to actually be accepted by the Democrat Senate or by Biden. It was a negotiating position, and it was always kind of aspirational. And I think as it is, we've done some pretty good things in it when you really look at it. Um, and the debt limit issue, I think, it's an ongoing battle. I think this is just a first step as I see it. And what I think will probably happen is there may be some pressure, in the fiscal 2024 and then later on the 2025 budget to actually make additional cuts in some of the areas, such as, for instance, the IRS agents as an example. I think that's an area where they'll push further. They only got $2 billion out of it this time, but I think they're going to try to cut more later. And there's other, and they have put a hold on this whole, gigantic college debt forgiveness, which is probably the biggest money item in the whole thing. And hopefully the Supreme Court will make the right decision and declare that Biden didn't have the legal authority to do it in the first place. And if that's the case, we could kill the whole thing. This is an ongoing situation. Obviously, there are some flaws in it, but what do you expect when you're dealing with the Democrats? And also remember that we were able to avoid any tax increases, which is what they were pushing for. And I also, like I said, otherwise, I think if this thing had failed, it's my opinion that we probably might have ended up with a clean debt deal and no cuts at all. But at any rate, we'll see what happens. That's my opinion on it. I'm not crying over the outcome at all, and I hope that everybody stabilizes here and don't do anything stupid afterwards. I mean, I still say that Kevin McCarthy is the best House Speaker that Republicans had since Newt Gingrich, and certainly compared to people like Hastert, Boehner, or Paul Ryan, far better. You're never going to get perfection here. Anyway, that's my opinion on that one, and I'll be wrapping this up for now. I'll post on Rumble as always, and links to social media accounts in the description below. And until next time.